The wind in the Hindu Kush did not blow. It bit. It was a living, malevolent thing that scraped against the exposed skin of the neck and found its way through the microscopic weaves of Kevlar and thermal layers. At 3,000 meters above sea level, the air was thin, tasting of ozone and ancient dust, a flavor that Colonel Elena Vance had come to associate with the taste of impending violence. She lay prone on the ridge, her body pressed into the freezing scree, indistinguishable from the jagged rocks that surrounded her. To the untrained eye, she was simply a shadow within a shadow. To the thermal optics of the drone circling 20,000 feet above, she was a faint, rhythmic heat signature, a controlled burn of discipline and lethal intent. 2 minutes to intercept, a voice crackled in her earpiece. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Mark Sterling. It was a voice that, in another life, discussed mortgage rates and the best way to marinate a steak for Sunday dinner. Here, amidst the jagged peaks of the Korangal Valley, it was the voice of God, calm, omniscient, and absolute. Elena shifted her weight imperceptibly, the barrel of her suppressed carbine traversing a fraction of an inch to the left. She didn't need to look at him to know exactly where he was. Mark was 3 meters to her right, his breathing synced with hers, his heartbeat a rhythm she had known for 15 years. They were the commanders of Alpha Team, a husband and wife paradox in the rigid world of special operations, a duo that shouldn't have existed but was too effective to separate. Below them, the target compound sat like a festering wound in the valley floor. It was a collection of mud brick huts surrounded by a low wall, illuminated only by the dying embers of a cooking fire and the harsh, swaying beam of a single spotlight. Inside, intelligence confirmed, were 3 Doctors Without Borders volunteers who had been snatched from a convoy 48 hours ago. The deadline for their execution was sunrise. Elena checked her watch. The glowing tritium hands read 3:14. The darkest part of the night. The witching hour. Moving, Elena whispered. Her voice was not a sound. It was a vibration in her throat, picked up by the throat mic and transmitted directly to her team. She slid down the scree, moving with a fluidity that defied the 40 pounds of gear strapped to her frame. This was the part of the job she hated and loved in equal measure, the stalk. It required a suspension of humanity. You had to stop being a person with fears, memories, and a future. You had to become physics. You had to become a calculation of noise discipline, line of sight, and velocity. At the base of the wall, the team coalesced. 6 operators, ghosts in multicam, communicating in a language of hand signals and subtle nods. Mark took point. He held up a fist, then 2 fingers. 2 sentries. South gate. Elena moved to the flank. She holstered her primary weapon and drew a combat knife. The blade was matte black, non-reflective, a piece of cold steel that felt like an extension of her own radius bone. Bullets were loud. Bullets were messy. At this range, intimacy was required. She shadowed Mark as they approached the sentries. The guards were young, barely men. Their AK-47s slung lazily over their shoulders as they shared a cigarette, the cherry glowing bright orange in the dark. They were laughing about something. A joke, a girl, a memory of home. It didn't matter. In war, context is the first casualty. Mark took the one on the left. Elena took the one on the right. The synchronization was flawless, born of 1,000 hours in the shoot house and a decade of marriage.
Elena lunged.
Her left hand clamped over the sentry's mouth before he could inhale to scream, her fingers digging into his cheeks to anchor his head. In the same motion, her right hand drove the blade into the soft hollow between the clavicle and the trap muscle, severing the subclavian artery. It was not like the movies. There was no dramatic struggle. There was only a sudden, heavy sag of weight. The body went limp against her, a puppet with its strings cut. She felt the hot wash of blood over her gloves, sticky and metallic. She lowered him gently to the ground, respecting the silence more than the dead. Beside her, Mark had done the same. He looked at her, his eyes visible through his night vision goggles as twin green orbs. He gave a single, sharp nod. Clear. They stacked up on the main door. The breaching charge was applied, a strip of explosive tape that would shear the hinges without bringing the roof down. Mark raised his hand. 3. 2, 1. The detonation was a dull thump, felt in the chest rather than heard. The door fell inward. Go, go, go! The team flooded the room. The air instantly filled with the haze of drywall dust and the blinding strobe of tactical lights. U.S. forces. Get down. Get down. The room smelled of unwashed bodies, stale flatbread, and acute terror. In the corner, huddling under filthy wool blankets, were the 3 hostages. They were emaciated, their eyes wide and white in the sudden glare of the flashlights. One of them, a young woman, began to scream, a high, keening sound of pure hysteria. Elena holstered her weapon and rushed to them. She dropped to one knee, her demeanor shifting instantly from predator to protector. She ripped off her goggles so the woman could see her eyes. Human eyes, a woman's eyes. Look at me, Elena commanded, her voice firm but laced with an urgent warmth. She grabbed the woman's trembling shoulders. We are Americans. You are safe. We are taking you home. Do you understand? The woman nodded, collapsing into Elena's chest, sobbing. Elena held her for a split second, absorbing the fragility of the life she was saving, before the soldier took over again. Miller, get them up. Package is secure. We are leaving. Now. Copy that, Colonel. Moving to extraction. It was going too well. Elena felt the itch at the base of her skull again. The universe demanded balance. You couldn't take 3 lives from the jaws of death without offering something in return. They exited the hut into the courtyard. The extraction helicopter, a sleek Black Hawk modified for silent running, was inbound, 2 minutes out. They just needed to cross 200 meters of open ground to the dry riverbed where the bird would touch down. They made it 50 meters before the world ended. A flare popped overhead, bathing the valley in a stark, magnesium-white light that turned the night into a harsh, exposure-blown photograph. Ambush! Mark roared, shoving Elena and the hostages behind a low stone wall just as the air filled with the angry hornet buzz of supersonic rounds. The ridge line they had just descended erupted with muzzle flashes. It was a kill box. They had walked right into it. The silence of the stealth mission was replaced by a cacophony so loud it rattled the teeth. The thud-thud-thud of a heavy machine gun echoed off the canyon walls, chewing up the mud bricks of their cover. Suppressive fire! Elena screamed, leaning out to unleash a burst from her carbine. She saw a shadow fall on the ridge. One down, but there were dozens more. They knew we were coming. It's a setup. Doesn't matter now. Mark was beside her, firing with calm, rhythmic precision. He turned to Miller. Get the hostages to the LZ landing zone. We'll hold the rear. Go. Miller hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking at his commanders, before grabbing the hostages and sprinting toward the riverbed. Covering! Elena yelled, changing magazines. Her movements were a blur of muscle memory. Drop mag, insert fresh mag, slap bolt release. Engage. She and Mark moved in a bounding retreat, fire and move, fire and move. They were a single organism, covering each other's blind spots, communicating without words. They were dancing through a thunderstorm of lead. Dirt kicked up into Elena's face, blinding her for a moment. A round snapped past her ear, close enough to feel the heat. RPG. The warning came too late. The rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the ground 10 meters to their left. The concussion was like being hit by a truck. Elena was lifted off her feet and thrown backward. She hit the hard earth with a bone-jarring thud, the breath driven from her lungs. Her vision swam, gray static eating at the edges of her consciousness. The high-pitched ringing in her ears drowned out the gunfire. She struggled to her hands and knees, spitting out grit. Mark, he was there. He had taken the brunt of the blast wave to shield her. He was shaking his head, stumbling, but he was up. He grabbed her vest and hauled her to her feet. Blood was trickling from his nose, but he grinned. That wild, adrenaline-fueled grin that she had fallen in love with during survival school. Come on, Elle. The bird is down. Let's go. The Black Hawk was kicking up a sandstorm in the riverbed, its miniguns roaring as the door gunners laid down a wall of hate to cover their retreat. They were so close, 50 meters. They ran. Elena's legs burned, her lungs screaming for oxygen that the thin air couldn't provide. She could see the crew chief waving them in. She could see safety. Mark was a step behind her, covering their six. She reached the ramp of the helicopter and spun around, reaching out her hand to pull him in. Mark, come on. He was running hard, his face contorted with effort. He reached for her hand. Their fingers brushed, and then he jerked. It wasn't a dramatic flail. It was a sudden, violent stop, as if he had run into an invisible wall. A sniper's round, heavy and high caliber, caught him in the side, just below the armpit where the body armor plates didn't overlap. The impact spun him around. He fell face first into the sand. No! The scream tore from Elena's throat, raw and bloody. She didn't think. She didn't assess. She leaped from the ramp of the helicopter, abandoning the safety of the metal bird, sprinting back into the kill zone. Bullets kicked up sand around her feet, but she didn't feel them. She slid into the dirt beside him, rolling him over. Mark, look at me. His eyes were wide, staring up at the chaotic sky. His mouth opened, but only blood bubbled out. The wound in his chest was catastrophic. The exit wound. She didn't want to look at the exit wound. She pressed her hands over the hole, trying to seal the ruined flesh, trying to hold his life inside his body by sheer force of will. Medic! She shrieked, looking back at the helicopter. Get out here! 2 operators jumped out, grabbing Mark by his vest straps. Together, under a hail of gunfire, they dragged him back to the ramp. Elena kept her hands on his chest the entire way, slipping in his blood, her knees scraping against the rocks. They hauled him onto the metal deck of the Black Hawk. Go, go, go. The crew chief yelled, pounding the fuselage. The helicopter lurched into the air, banking hard to escape the valley. The interior of the chopper was bathed in a red tactical light. It made the blood look black. Stay with me, Mark. Stay with me. Damn you. Elena was straddling him, her hands slippery and red. She was performing CPR, pumping his chest, but she could feel the damage beneath her palms. Ribs were shattered. The lung was collapsed. Every compression pumped more blood out of him. Mark's hand fluttered up, weak as a dying bird, and gripped her wrist. His grip, once strong enough to crush stone, was now terrifyingly faint. Elena stopped. She looked at his face. The color was draining away, leaving him a translucent gray. He was drowning in his own blood. El rasped. The sound was wet and broken. I'm here. I'm right here, baby. You're going to be fine. We're going home. She was lying. She knew she was lying. He knew she was lying. Mark smiled. It was a ghost of a smile, sad and infinitely tired. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the blood, the dirt, and the soldier. Time to put the sword down, he whispered. Each word cost him everything he had left. Promise me, Mark, please. Tears cut tracks through the grime on her face. Promise me, live. Just live. His chest hitched once. A long, rattling exhalation left his lips, carrying with it the spark that made him Mark Sterling. His eyes remained open, fixed on her, but the light behind them, the intelligence, the humor, the love, was extinguished. Mark? The helicopter vibrated around them. The miniguns had stopped firing. The only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the rotors and the howl of the wind outside. Elena collapsed forward, her forehead resting on his blood-soaked vest. She didn't scream. She didn't wail. She just broke. It was a silent, internal shattering, like a structural beam snapping deep within a building. She lay there, listening for a heartbeat that wasn't there, feeling the warmth slowly seep out of the only person who understood the war inside her head. The medic reached out to touch her shoulder. Mom. Colonel. He's gone. Elena slapped his hand away. Don't touch him. Her voice was a low growl, feral and dangerous. She sat up, wiping her face with a bloody hand, leaving a smear of crimson across her forehead like a war paint. She closed Mark's eyes with her thumb and forefinger. She sat by his body for the entire hour-long flight back to base. She didn't move. She watched the blood dry on her uniform, turning into a stiff, dark crust. She watched the sunrise over the mountains, a beautiful, indifferent orange glow that mocked her grief. Put the sword down. The words echoed in her skull, bouncing around the empty chambers of her mind. When they landed, she didn't wait for the honor guard. She helped carry the body bag. She walked with a rigid, mechanical gait, her face a mask of stone. She filed the report. She signed the papers. She was efficient. She was a colonel. But Elena Vance died that morning in the helicopter. 3 months later, Arlington National Cemetery. It was raining. Of course it was raining. The sky was a slate-gray sheet, weeping onto the rows of white marble headstones. The air smelled of wet grass and finality. The rifle salute cracked through the silence. 3 volleys, 21 shots. Elena didn't flinch. She stood ramrod straight, her dress blues perfectly tailored, the medals on her chest heavy and meaningless. She watched the flag being folded, triangle by triangle, blue tucking into white, red disappearing, a geometric reduction of a man's life into a piece of cloth. The general handed her the flag. On behalf of a grateful nation, Elena took it. She didn't hear the rest. She was looking at the hole in the ground, 6 feet deep, not deep enough to bury the memories, not deep enough to silence the sounds of the Korangal Valley that played on a loop in her head every time she closed her eyes. After the ceremony, people tried to talk to her. General officers, politicians, old teammates. They offered condolences, platitudes about heroism and sacrifice. She nodded. She shook hands. She said the right things. But she was behind a glass wall, watching the world from a great distance. She went back to their house in Virginia. It was quiet. The silence was louder than the gunfire. His toothbrush was still in the holder. His running shoes were by the door. Elena walked into the bedroom. She opened the large cedar trunk at the foot of the bed. Slowly, methodically, she began to strip. She took off the dress blues jacket, unpinning the ribbons one by one. The silver star, the purple heart, the commendation medals. She placed them in a small velvet box and set it at the bottom of the trunk. Next came the combat gear she had kept. The worn tactical gloves. The boots that still had dust from the Hindu Kush in the treads. The K-bar knife with the scratched handle. She looked at her hands. They were scarred, calloused, strong. Killer's hands. She remembered the feeling of the sentry's neck snapping. She remembered the warmth of Mark's blood. She went to the bathroom and scrubbed them. She used a stiff-bristled brush and bleach. She scrubbed until her skin was raw and red, until it stung, trying to wash away the invisible stain. It wouldn't come off. It never would. She returned to the trunk. She placed the folded flag on top of the pile. Then, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her dog tags.
Vance, Elena.
Bozo. She held them for a long moment, the metal warming in her palm. Then, she dropped them into the trunk. They clinked against the metals. She closed the heavy wooden lid. Click. The sound of the lock engaging was final. Elena stood up. She walked to the mirror. The woman staring back was gaunt. Her eyes hollow, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. No more, she whispered to the reflection. No more swords. She packed a single suitcase. Civilian clothes. Loose, comfortable things that didn't constrict, that didn't remind her of body armor. She picked up a book from the nightstand, a weathered copy of The Heart of Yoga that Mark had bought her as a joke years ago because she was too high-strung. She hadn't opened it until the night after he died. Now it was her map. She called a realtor and listed the house. She called the Pentagon and finalized her retirement papers. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She bought a ticket to Chicago, a big city, a place to get lost, a place where the noise of millions of people might drown out the silence of one absent man. Elena walked out the front door, leaving the keys under the mat. She didn't look back. The rain had stopped, leaving the world washed out and gray. She took a breath. It was shaky, uneven. Inhale. The soldier is gone. exhale. Elena remains. She stepped off the porch and began to walk, one foot in front of the other, learning how to move without a target, learning how to live without a war. But deep down, in the reptilian part of her brain that never slept, the tiger was pacing its cage, waiting. Chicago did not welcome Elena Vance. It swallowed her. The city was a sprawling, gray beast of steel and concrete, vibrating with a frequency that grated against her raw nerve endings. She rented a small, one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a brick walk-up in Rogers Park, a neighborhood chosen not for its charm, but for its anonymity. The landlord, a man with grease under his fingernails and a lack of curiosity, took her cash deposit without asking for a background check. He saw a middle-aged woman with sad eyes. He didn't see the way she automatically scanned the perimeter of the hallway or how she stood with her back to the wall while he counted the bills. The first few months were a fugue state of survival. Elena had left the war, but the war had not left her. It lived in the screech of the L train that sounded like incoming mortar fire. It lived in the sudden slam of a car door that sent her pulse hammering into the red zone of a tachometer. Her body was still in the Korangal Valley. Her cortisol levels remained permanently spiked, waiting for a threat that was no longer there. Sleep was the enemy. The bed she had bought was too soft, a marshmallow's trap that made her feel vulnerable. For the first 6 weeks, she slept on the hardwood floor of the living room, wrapped in a single wool blanket, facing the door. A loaded Glock 19, the only weapon she hadn't tossed into the trunk, sat within arm's reach. Every night, the nightmares came with the punctuality of a train schedule. She would be back in the sand, holding Mark's cooling hand, but when she looked up, the helicopter was gone, and she was alone in an infinite desert of bone dust. She would wake up gasping, her body drenched in cold sweat, her finger curling around the trigger of the gun before her conscious mind could catch up. She developed a routine to keep the madness at bay. She walked for miles along the lakefront, letting the icy wind off Lake Michigan numb her face. She counted things: fire hydrants, blue cars, people wearing red hats. Counting was order. Order was safety. But she was a ghost haunting the city, transparent and cold. She avoided eye contact. If someone walked too close behind her, the muscles in her back would spasm, coiling for a strike. One Tuesday in November, the tenuous dam holding back her violence nearly broke. She was in a crowded grocery store, the fluorescent lights humming with a sickly yellow buzz that gave her a migraine. The aisles were narrow, clogged with shoppers. A man, distracted by his phone, rounded the corner of the cereal aisle too fast. He slammed into her hard. It was an accident, just a clumsy collision in a supermarket. But Elena's amygdala didn't register shopper. It registered combatant. Before the box of cereal hit the floor, Elena had reacted. Her left hand shot up, deflecting his arm, while her right hand seized his throat, thumb digging into the carotid artery. She drove him back into the shelving unit, her knee coming up to check his hip. It was a takedown maneuver she had drilled 10,000 times. "Hey, lady, what the hell?" The man choked, his eyes bulging in terror. The sound of his voice, strangled and American, shattered the trance.
Elena froze.
She looked around. Mothers were pulling their children closer. A stock boy was staring with his mouth open. The man under her grip wasn't a terrorist. He was a guy in a Bears jersey, smelling of fabric softener and fear. She released him as if he were burning hot. Her hands were shaking. I'm sorry," she stammered, backing away. "I didn't. I'm sorry." She turned and ran. She abandoned her cart, fled the store, and didn't stop until she was 3 blocks away, hyperventilating in an alleyway. She slid down the brick wall, burying her face in her hands. She was a monster, a malfunctioned machine. Mark had told her to put the sword down, but she was the sword. How do you unforge steel? It was in this state of desperation that she found the studio. It was a week later. She was walking a different route to avoid the grocery store, down a quiet side street lined with brownstones. A small, hand-painted sign swung in the wind: Eastern Sun Yoga and Healing. The letters were faded, peeling gold paint on wood. Elena had always dismissed yoga. In the military, it was viewed as stretching for people who couldn't handle ruck marches. But she remembered the book Mark had given her, The Heart of Yoga. She remembered the way he had looked at her when he gave it to her, with that knowing half-smile. You need to learn how to bend L before you break. She pushed the door open. A bell chimed softly. Not a harsh electronic buzzer, but a real brass bell. The air inside was warm and smelled of sandalwood and old paper. It was quiet, but not the heavy, dead silence of an empty house. It was a living silence, a presence. An old man sat behind a wooden desk. He was thin, with skin like crumpled parchment and eyes that seemed to contain the depth of a well. He didn't look up when she entered. He just continued pouring tea from a clay pot. "The class is full," he said softly. "I don't want a class," Elena said. Her voice was rusty. She hadn't spoken to anyone in days. "I want to stop shaking." The old man looked up then. He studied her. He didn't look at her clothes or her face. He looked at her stance, the way her weight was distributed on the balls of her feet, the tension in her trapezius muscles, the way her hands were balled into loose fists. He saw the soldier. "War is a loud place," he said, pushing a cup of tea toward her. "Peace is very quiet. The transition can be deafening." His name was Master Hideo. He was not a soft man. He was a survivor of internment camps, a man who had known suffering intimately. He didn't offer her pity. He offered her discipline. Elena began to attend classes daily. At first, it was torture. The physical aspect was easy. She was strong. Her core was iron. She could hold a plank for 10 minutes without breaking a sweat. But the stillness? The stillness was agony. Gopspuz. Savasana. Hideo would instruct at the end of class. Lie on your back. Close your eyes. Do nothing. For Elena, closing her eyes meant inviting the demons in. Lying on her back exposed her vital organs. Doing nothing felt like dying. Her mind would race, cataloging exits, analyzing the structural integrity of the ceiling, replaying the moment Mark died. She would twitch, sweat, sometimes silently weep tears of frustration. "You are fighting the floor, Elena," Hideo whispered one evening, standing over her while the rest of the class breathed in unison. "The floor is holding you. You do not need to hold yourself. Surrender. Surrender." The word was an obscenity to a special forces officer. Surrender meant failure. Surrender meant death. "I can't," she whispered back, her eyes squeezed shut. "You must," he said. "The armor you wear, it is crushing you. It served you well in the fire. But you are not in the fire anymore. If you do not take it off, you will drown in the river." The breakthrough happened 3 months later. It was a snowy Tuesday. They were practicing pranayama, breath control. Inhale for 4. Hideo guided. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. It was the same pattern as tactical box breathing. But the intention was different. In the field, she breathed to sharpen her focus for the kill. Here, Hideo asked her to breathe to expand the space around her heart. "Imagine the breath is a light," Hideo said. "Send it to the darkest place in your body." Elena sent her breath to the tight knot of grief in her chest. She visualized the Korangal Valley. She visualized Mark. But instead of the blood, she visualized his smile. She visualized the way he looked in the morning light. She let the breath touch the memory, not to sanitize it, but to acknowledge it. "It hurts," she thought. "God, it hurts." And for the first time, she didn't push the pain away. She didn't convert it into anger or tactical awareness. She just let it be pain. She exhaled, and a sound escaped her lips. A low, guttural sob that seemed to come from the marrow of her bones. She cried. Not the silent, stoic weeping of the funeral, but ugly, messy, heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. She curled into a fetal position on the mat. The class continued around her, undisturbed. Hideo placed a heavy wool blanket over her shaking body and walked away. He gave her the dignity of falling apart safely. That night, she slept in her bed. She slept for 8 hours. She didn't dream. Over the next 2 years, the transformation began. It was a deliberate deconstruction of Colonel Elena Vance. She realized that her physical presence was too intense. Even standing still, she projected a "don't fuck with me" aura that drew aggression. If she wanted peace, she had to become something else. She had to become harmless. She stopped dyeing her hair. She let the silver roots grow out, claiming the gray that the war had given her. It softened her face. She stopped wearing contact lenses and bought reading glasses she didn't really need, perching them on her nose. She changed her wardrobe. The tactical pants and fitted jackets were replaced by flowing linens, soft cottons, oversized cardigans that hid the definition of her shoulders and biceps. She studied the way elderly women moved. She practiced shortening her stride. She practiced rounding her shoulders slightly, hiding the military uprightness of her spine. She learned to soften her gaze, to turn off the 1,000-yard stare, and replace it with a look of mild, benevolent confusion. It was the ultimate camouflage. The gray man theory applied to a grandmother. Who suspects the little old lady with the tote bag? Who fears the woman who needs help opening a jar? She became invisible, and in that invisibility she found freedom. She deepened her practice. She earned her teaching certification, then her advanced certification. She studied anatomy, realizing that the mechanics of breaking a body were the exact inverse of the mechanics of healing one. She knew exactly how a wrist joint locked to cause pain. Therefore, she knew exactly how to manipulate it to release tension. Her classes became popular at Hindu Studio. Students said she had magic hands, that she could find pain they didn't know they had and dissolve it. They didn't know those hands knew the anatomy of death intimately. 5 years after she arrived in Chicago, Master Hideo passed away in his sleep. He left her his singing bowl and a note. The warrior is not the one who conquers the world. The warrior is the one who conquers herself. You are ready. Elena took her savings, the combat pay she had never touched, and bought a derelict storefront in a suburb on the edge of the city. It had been a bakery, then a dry cleaner. It was dusty and smelled of chemicals. She spent months renovating it herself. She tore down the walls. She sanded the floors until the wood gleamed like honey. She painted the walls a soft, creamy white. She installed dimmable lights and brought in plants, ferns, peace lilies, bamboo, life. She wanted the space to be full of life. She hung a sign outside, Serenity Studio. On the opening day, she stood in the center of the empty room. She looked at her reflection in the wall-to-wall mirrors. The woman staring back was 60 years old. Her hair was a loose bun of silver. Her face was lined with the map of her life, but the eyes were no longer haunted. They were clear, brown and warm. She was no longer Colonel Vance. She was just Elena. The bell above the door chimed. Elena turned. Her first student walked in. A young woman, looking stressed, clutching a yoga mat like a shield. "Hi," the woman said nervously. I've never done this before. I'm really stiff. I hope that's okay."
Elena smiled.
It was a genuine smile, reaching her eyes. She clasped her hands in front of her heart. "Welcome," Elena said, her voice dropping to that soothing, melodic register she had cultivated over the years. Stiffness is just the body holding on to stories it doesn't need to tell anymore. We will work on letting them go. She walked over to the sound system and pressed play. A soft ambient track filled the room. "Please," Elena gestured to the floor. "Take a space. The mat is your sanctuary." As the class began, Elena moved through the room, adjusting a shoulder here, correcting a hip alignment there. She felt a profound sense of purpose. She was no longer a destroyer. She was a mender. She was guarding this flock, not with a rifle, but with compassion. But as she walked past the window, glancing out at the darkening street, a police cruiser rolled by, its siren chirping once. Elena's head snapped toward the sound. Her eyes narrowed by a fraction of a millimeter. Her breathing paused for a split second. Her hand twitched toward her hip, where a holster used to be. The reflex was faster than thought. It was still there. Buried under layers of linen and mantra, the tiger was sleeping. It was older now, heavier, but it had not lost its teeth. Elena exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to drop. She turned back to her student. "Inhale up," she commanded softly. "Exhale, fold forward." She was safe. They were safe. The world was at peace. For now. The vibration in Kane's pocket felt like a taser pressed against his thigh. He ignored it for the third time, but the buzzing persisted, a relentless, insectoid drilling that seemed to synchronize with the pounding headache behind his left eye. He was huddled in the doorway of a condemned laundromat on Devon Avenue, the collar of his stained gray hoodie pulled up to shield his face from the biting wind. It was a miserable Tuesday morning in Chicago, the kind where the sky is the color of a dirty nickel and the air tastes of exhaust and unfulfilled promises. Kane, born Kevin O'Shea, but that name had died 5 years ago along with his credit score and his relationship with his mother. Wiped a line of snot from his nose with the back of a trembling hand. He was sick. Not the flu, not a cold, but the deep, marrow-eating sickness of a body screaming for opioids. It had been 12 hours since his last hit. The dope sick was creeping in like a rising tide. The restless legs, the cold sweat that felt like a layer of frost on his skin, the nausea that roiled in his gut like a nest of snakes. The phone buzzed again. This time he pulled it out. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbing across the caller ID. Marco. Kane stared at the name. Marco wasn't a friend. Marco was a debt collector for the Albanian crew that ran the distribution out of a seemingly legitimate auto body shop in Uptown. Kane owed them $4,000. He had lost the package, a bag of fentanyl-laced heroin, 2 days ago. Or maybe he had smoked it. The memory was a blur of gray static. It didn't matter where it went. It mattered that he didn't have the money. He answered. He didn't say hello. "Tick-tock, Kevin?" Marco's voice was smooth, bored, carrying the faint sound of a pneumatic drill in the background. "It's noon. You said noon." I'm getting it," Kane stammered. His voice sounded thin, brittle. "I just need a little more time. The bank. The transfer didn't go through yet." "There is no bank," Marco sighed. "And there is no transfer. You have 1 hour. If you don't have the cash or something worth the cash, don't bother coming back. We'll come to you. And Kevin? We know where your sister lives in Skokie." The line went dead. Kane stared at the phone until the screen went black. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of withdrawal. His sister, Jenny. She had a kid, a little girl. The image of Marco walking up to Jenny's front door, with his dead eyes and his heavy rings, made Kane gag. He turned and retched bile onto the frozen pavement. He needed money. Fast. He needed a score. He patted the pocket of his hoodie. The weight was there. A buck knife, 6 inches of serrated steel, he had shoplifted from a Bass Pro Shop a lifetime ago. It was his only asset. His solution to the equation. Kane pushed himself off the wall. His knees popped. He began to walk, his gait shuffling and erratic. He moved south, away from the prying eyes of the main strip, drifting toward the quieter, wealthier blocks where the houses had manicured lawns and the cars were German imports. He was a shark in shallow water, hungry, desperate, and terrifyingly mindless. He didn't have a plan. He just had a knife and a clock ticking down in his head. Tick, tock. 3 blocks away, inside the Serenity Studio, the world was a different color. If the street outside was gray and jagged, the studio was amber and soft. The morning light filtered through the frosted glass of the front window, diffused into a golden haze that caught the dust motes dancing in the air. The room smelled of lavender essential oil and beeswax candles. The temperature was set to a perfect 72 degrees, a tropical island in the middle of a Chicago winter. Elena Vance moved through the space with the silent efficiency of a temple keeper. She adjusted the thermostat. She straightened the stack of cork yoga blocks. She lit the 3 candles on the small altar at the front of the room, not for religion but for focus. She was wearing her teaching uniform, white linen pants that flowed like water and a soft, beige wrap sweater. Her silver hair was pulled back into a loose, messy bun, held in place by a wooden stick. She looked every inch the harmless, Earth Mother grandmother. But as she placed a bolster on the floor, her hand lingered on the fabric. Her eyes scanned the room, not just looking, but indexing. Exits, front door, glass, vulnerable, back door, steel, locked from inside. Sight lines, clear, cover minimal. The assessment was unconscious, a background process running in her brain like a computer's operating system. It never turned off. Even after 5 years of peace, Elena Vance checked the perimeter. She noted that the front door's bell was slightly muffled today. Humidity, perhaps. She noted that the delivery truck parked across the street had been there for 20 minutes without anyone getting out. Paranoia, she told herself, forcing a breath. Inhale peace. Exhale the soldier. The bell chimed. The door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the noise of a passing siren before sealing shut again. Good morning, Elena. It was Sarah. At 4 months pregnant, Sarah was glowing. Her cheeks flushed from the cold. She unwound a thick scarf from her neck, revealing a smile that could disarm a gunman. She was carrying a yoga mat under one arm and a bag of oranges in the other. Morning, sweetie, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave into her teacher tone. Warm, enveloping, safe. She walked over and took the oranges. You shouldn't be carrying heavy things on the ice. It's 5 pounds of fruit, Elena, not a rucksack, Sarah laughed, rubbing her small baby bump. Little Bean is kicking up a storm today. I think he wants to do some warrior poses. Warrior poses we can do, Elena smiled, touching Sarah's arm. But we'll modify. No twisting the torso today. We need to make space for the bean. Next came Mrs. Higgins. She entered with the aid of a cane, tapping the snow off her boots with a rhythmic thwack-thwack. Mrs. Higgins was 75, brittle as a dried leaf, and possessed a tongue sharper than Elena's old combat knife. It's freezing out there, Mrs. Higgins grumbled, handing her coat to Elena. If I freeze to death in Savasana, I'm suing you, Elena. I'll turn the heat up just for you, Martha, Elena promised, hanging the coat on the rack. Slowly, the room filled. 15 women. A cross-section of the neighborhood. There was a nurse who had just come off a 12-hour shift, looking like she might fall asleep standing up. There was a corporate lawyer who checked her BlackBerry 3 times before turning it off with a grimace. There were mothers, grandmothers, daughters. They took off their shoes. They left the city at the door. They rolled out their mats, purple, green, blue, creating a patchwork quilt of safe spaces on the hardwood floor. Elena walked to the front of the room. She sat in the lotus position, her spine straight, her hands resting on her knees in Gan Mudra. She waited. Gradually, the chatter died down. The rustling of clothes stopped. The room settled into a heavy, expectant silence. Let's begin, Elena said softly. Close your eyes. Find your breath. Inhale through the nose, and out through the nose. The sound of 15 people breathing in unison filled the room. It was the sound of the ocean. It was the sound of life. Elena closed her eyes, letting the rhythm wash over her. For a moment, she wasn't a killer. She wasn't a widow. She was just a conduit for peace. Kane stood across the street, watching the delivery truck drive away. He was shivering violently now. The cold had seeped into his bones. He watched the women enter the storefront. He saw the sign, Serenity Studio. He saw the soft light. He saw targets. His drug-addled brain began to construct a narrative. Yoga. That meant money. That meant Lululemon pants and expensive handbags. That meant iPhones left in cubbies while they stretched. It meant women who wouldn't fight back. Soft women. Women who had never been hit in the face. He had tried the liquor store on the corner, but the cashier was behind bulletproof glass and looked like he had a shotgun under the counter. He had thought about snatching a purse on the street, but there were too many witnesses, too many cars. But this was a fishbowl. He crossed the street, dodging a taxi that honked at him. Kane flipped the driver off, his movement jerky and aggressive. He stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the studio. He peered through the frosted glass. He could see blurry shapes, rows of people sitting on the floor. They were sitting ducks. Do it, the voice in his head whispered. It sounded like Marco. Get in, scare them, grab the bags, get out. 5 minutes. Easy. He put his hand on the door handle. It was cold metal. He hesitated. A flicker of conscience? No, just fear. Fear of getting caught. Fear of prison. But the fear of Marco was greater. The fear of the sickness was greater. He pulled the knife from his pocket. The blade clicked open. It looked jagged and ugly against the soft backdrop of the suburban street. Cain took a deep breath. It rattled in his chest like loose gravel. He needed to be scary. He needed to be a monster. If he was a monster, they would submit. He didn't just open the door. He needed shock and awe. Inside, the class was moving into Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward-facing dog. Press your palms into the mat, Elena instructed, walking slowly between the rows of students. Spread your fingers wide. Lift your hips toward the sky. Let your head hang heavy. She stopped beside Sarah. Soft knees, Sarah. Don't hyperextend. She placed a gentle hand on Sarah's lower back, grounding her. Sarah sighed, her tension melting away. The room was a sanctuary of vulnerability. In this pose, their vision was inverted, their backs were exposed. Their situational awareness was zero. They trusted the room. They trusted the lock on the door. They trusted Elena. Elena walked back toward the front of the room. As she turned, her gaze flickered to the front window. A shadow moved across the frosted glass. Fast. Too fast for a pedestrian. The hair on the back of Elena's neck stood up. The scar on her shoulder, a souvenir from a piece of shrapnel in Fallujah, began to itch. Something is wrong. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a sensory input that bypassed the frontal cortex and went straight to the brainstem. The rhythm of the street outside had changed. The vibration of the floorboards was different. Stay in the pose, Elena said, her voice remaining calm, but tightening just enough that the nurse in the back row looked up. Elena took a step toward the door. She didn't know why. She just knew she needed to be between the glass and the women. Then the world shattered. The sound was deafening. It wasn't just the chime of the bell this time. It was the violent crash of the door being kicked open so hard it rebounded off the wall, cracking the plaster. The glass pane in the center of the door vibrated, singing a high-pitched note of stress. A blast of freezing wind tore through the room, extinguishing the candles instantly. The smell of lavender was obliterated by the smell of unwashed sweat, stale tobacco, and metallic fear. Nobody moved. The scream shredded the tranquil atmosphere. Cain stood in the doorway. He looked massive in the small space, framed by the gray light of the street. His hood was up, casting his face in shadow, but his eyes were visible, wide, manic, darting around the room like trapped birds. In his right hand, the knife was held low, the blade pointing up. The classic grip of someone who intends to gut, not slash. The reaction in the room was delayed by a second of pure cognitive dissonance. The women were in downward dog. Their brains couldn't reconcile the instruction, breathe into your hips, with the reality of a screaming man with a knife. Then the screaming started. It began with the corporate lawyer, a high-pitched shriek as she scrambled backward, tangling her feet in her yoga mat. Then the others joined in, a cacophony of terror. Women scrambled to their feet, slipping on the hardwood, knocking over water bottles and blocks. They huddled together instinctively, moving away from the door, moving toward the back corner. Shut up, or I'll cut every single one of you, Cain roared, stepping fully into the room. He swung the knife in a wide arc, carving the air. Phones, wallets, put them in the bag. Now, he grabbed a canvas tote bag from the coat rack and threw it into the center of the room. It landed with a soft thump. Mrs. Higgins was too slow. She was still on her knees, struggling to get up. She looked at Cain, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. You, Grandma! Cain lunged at her. Get up. Give me your rings. He grabbed Mrs. Higgins by the shoulder of her oversized t-shirt and yanked. She cried out, a frail, cracking sound. Hey! The voice cut through the panic like a whip. It wasn't a scream. It was a command. Cain froze. He looked toward the center of the room. Elena was standing there. She hadn't moved back with the others. She stood directly in his path about 10 feet away. She wasn't in a fighting stance, not yet. She was standing in Tadasana, mountain pose, feet hip-width apart, shoulders relaxed, arms by her sides. But her eyes. Cain had expected fear. He had expected pleading. He had seen it 100 times in the eyes of the people he bullied. But the woman standing before him wasn't looking at him with fear. She was looking at him with a terrifying curiosity. She was looking at him the way a butcher looks at a side of beef, deciding where to make the first cut. "Let her go," Elena said. Her voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but it carried to the back of the room. It was the voice she used to guide meditation, but stripped of all softness. It was flat, dead. Cain laughed. It was a wet, nervous sound. "Are you crazy, lady?" I said. "Get back. I'll kill her. I swear to God I'll kill her." To prove his point, he shoved Mrs. Higgins aside. The old woman tumbled onto the floor, gasping. Cain turned his attention to an easier target. Sarah. Sarah was frozen near the pillar, clutching her belly, her eyes wide with tears. She was the slow antelope at the edge of the herd. Cain saw the diamond ring on her finger. "You," Cain snarled, stepping over a yoga mat. "Pretty ring. Give it to me." He lunged for Sarah. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, jerking her head back. Sarah screamed, a primal sound of a mother protecting her unborn child. Cain brought the knife up, pressing the cold steel against the soft skin of her throat. "Don't come closer," Cain yelled at Elena, his spit flying. "Back off, or I open her up right here." The room went silent. The only sound was Sarah's ragged breathing and the wind whistling through the open door. Elena didn't step back. She didn't raise her hands in surrender. She exhaled. "Ooh." It was a long, audible breath. As she exhaled, her posture changed. It was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. Her chin tucked slightly. Her knees bent a fraction of an inch. Her weight shifted to the balls of her feet. The grandmother facade evaporated like mist in the sun. The lines of her body sharpened. The softness vanished. Inside Elena's mind, the Serenity Studio was gone. The lavender smell was gone. The music was gone. She was back in the Korangal. Target acquired. Distance, 8 feet. Weapon, fixed blade, right hand. Hostage, compromised. Threat, lethal. She looked at Cain's knuckles. They were white. He was gripping the knife too hard. He was unstable. He was going to kill Sarah whether he got the money or not. His pupils were pinpoint small. Opiates. He wasn't thinking, he was reacting. Elena took a step forward. "I said stay back." Cain shrieked, pressing the knife harder. A tiny bead of blood appeared on Sarah's neck, a bright red ruby against the pale skin. That drop of blood was the signal. "Sarah," Elena said, her eyes locking onto Sarah's terrified gaze. "Close your eyes." "What?" Cain blinked, confused by the nonsensical command.
Exhale, Elena whispered.
And then the steel lotus bloomed. The drop of blood on Sarah's neck was not a tragedy. It was a timer. To the 15 women cowering against the back wall of the Serenity Studio, the red bead swelling against the pale skin was a symbol of impending horror, a prelude to a massacre. To Cain, the junkie vibrating with chemical desperation, it was leverage, a bargaining chip to trade for a quick fix. But to the entity that currently inhabited the body of Elena Vance, the blood was simply data. It was the visual confirmation that the rules of engagement had shifted. The threshold had been crossed. The diplomatic window was sealed shut. Time, which had been racing with the erratic rhythm of Cain's drug-fueled heart, suddenly decoupled from reality. For Elena, the world decelerated into a viscous, gelatinous crawl. The scream tearing from Sarah's throat hung suspended in the air, a visible wave of sound distortion. The dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the open door froze in place. Elena didn't think. Thinking was slow. Thinking was for civilians who had the luxury of debating morality. Elena processed. Her mind, dormant for 5 years, rebooted the operating system she had buried in a trunk in Virginia. The code was old, written in the sand of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan, but it ran without a glitch. Threat assessment. Active. Distance. 7 feet. Obstacles 1 yoga mat. Target. Right-handed, unstable grip, weight distribution forward-leaning. Vulnerability. Exposed right wrist, high center of gravity. The Elena, who drank herbal tea and listened to wind chimes, receded into the dark recesses of her skull. In her place stood Colonel Vance. The transition was not physical. She didn't bulk up or grow claws, but it was palpable. The air around her seemed to drop 10 degrees. The warmth in her brown eyes was extinguished, replaced by the flat, shark-like indifference of a predator deciding which artery to sever first. "I said back off," Kane shrieked, his voice cracking. He didn't see the change. He saw a 60-year-old woman in linen pajamas standing too close. He tightened his grip on Sarah's hair. The knife pressed harder. Elena moved. She didn't telegraph it. There was no winding up, no clenching of fists, no shifting of feet. One moment she was stationary. The next, she was a blur of white motion, accelerating from zero to lethal with the explosive torque of a hydraulic piston. She stepped in with her left foot, a deep, penetrating step that invaded Kane's personal space before his brain could register the intrusion. Her hands, usually so gentle when adjusting a student's posture, shot out like striking cobras. Kane flinched. His instinct, honed by street brawls and domestic disputes, was to slash. He drove the knife forward, aiming for Elena's face. It was exactly what she wanted. As the blade sliced through the air, Elena didn't retreat. She slipped her head to the right, feeling the wind of the steel pass inches from her cheek. A cold kiss of death she had felt 1,000 times before. Simultaneously, her left hand slapped the inside of Kane's forearm, redirecting the energy of his strike, while her right hand snaked over his wrist. It was a textbook capture. Her thumb dug into the divot between his knuckles, her fingers wrapping around the meat of his palm. Grip secured. This was the fulcrum, the point of no return. Elena pivoted on her lead foot, her hips snapping with the precision of a bear trap. She wasn't fighting his strength. She was using it. She applied kotegaeshi, the wrist reversal. She torqued his wrist outward and down, against the natural range of motion of the joint. Snap. The sound was wet and loud, like a green branch breaking in a storm. Kane's scream was involuntary, a primal release of air as the radius and ulna bones ground against each other. The neural feedback was instantaneous and overwhelming. His fingers went numb. The knife clattered to the hardwood floor, spinning away harmlessly. Sarah, released from his grip as his body contorted in agony, collapsed backward, scrambling away on her hands and knees, gasping for air. Elena didn't watch her. She couldn't afford to. The threat was disarmed, but not neutralized. Kane was big, and pain often makes men dangerous before it makes them compliant. He swung a wild, clumsy haymaker with his left fist, roaring in blind fury. Elena ducked under the punch, the fabric of his hoodie brushing the top of her head. She was now inside his guard, chest to chest with a man twice her weight. She could smell him, the sour reek of unwashed sweat, the acrid chemical tang of methamphetamines, and the metallic scent of fear. Too close, the soldier whispered, "End it." She wrapped her right arm around his waist, clamping him tight to her body. Her left hand grabbed his right tricep, locking him into a clinch. She stepped her right hip deep across his pelvis, loading his center of gravity onto her own. For a split second, they looked like they were dancing, a grotesque waltz in the center of a yoga studio. Then Elena exploded upward. Ugoshi, major hip throw. She straightened her legs, driving through her heels. The mechanics of the throw rendered Kane's 220 pounds irrelevant. He was no longer a man, he was just mass, and she was the lever. His feet left the ground. The world flipped upside down for Kevin O'Shea. He saw the ceiling, the hanging plants, the horrified faces of the women, all spinning in a nauseating blur. Elena pulled down on his sleeve and rotated her torso. Gravity took over. Wham! The impact shook the entire building. Kane hit the floor flat on his back, the air driven from his lungs in a violent whoosh. The floorboards groaned in protest. The mirrors on the wall rattled. He lay there, stunned, eyes wide and unseeing, mouth gaping like a fish out of water. The wind was knocked out of him so completely that his brain couldn't even process the pain in his broken wrist. But Elena wasn't done. The soldier knew that a stunned enemy is still an enemy. You don't stop until the target is immobile. She didn't let go of him. She followed him down to the mat, her movement fluid and continuous. She landed in the mount position, straddling his chest. Her knees pinched tight against his ribs to limit his breathing. Cain began to thrash. Survival instinct kicked in. He bucked his hips, trying to throw her off. He flailed his good arm, clawing at her face. Elena leaned forward, her face inches from his. Her expression was terrifyingly calm. There was no anger, no hatred, just the cold, clinical efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. She slipped her right hand deep behind his neck. She grabbed the inside of her own left sleeve. Then, she brought her left forearm across his throat, gripping her right sleeve. The Ezekiel choke. Sodi Guruma Jaim. It was a choke that didn't require a GI. The loose fabric of her yoga sweater was a perfect weapon. She began to squeeze. It wasn't a crush. It was a constriction. Her forearms acted like a scythe, cutting off the carotid arteries on both sides of his neck. The blood flow to his brain was throttled. Cain's eyes bulged. He gagged, his heels drumming a frantic, staccato rhythm on the wooden floor. His left hand battered against Elena's back, slapping her, punching her kidneys. Elena didn't feel it. Adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. She stared into his eyes, watching the pupils dilate. Crush the trachea, the voice in her head hissed. It was the voice of the Karangal. Shatter the windpipe. He threatened the herd. He is a wolf. Kill the wolf. It would be so easy. Just a shift of pressure. A sharp drive of her forearm downward instead of across. The cartilage would collapse. He would suffocate in minutes. No jury would convict her. He had a knife. He had a hostage. It was justifiable. Do it, the memory of Mark whispered. Don't leave an enemy standing. Cain's face turned from red to purple. His thrashing weakened. His hand clawed at her shoulder, then slipped off. Elena felt the power of life and death in her hands. It was intoxicating. It was familiar. It was the drug she had been clean from for 5 years. The vibration of a dying man's struggle was a sensation she knew better than the touch of a lover. But then, a sound penetrated the red fog.
Elena.
It wasn't a tactical command. It was a cry of horror.
Elena blinked.
Her vision widened. She saw the edges of the room again. She saw the peace lilies in the corner. She saw the altar with the unlit candles. She looked down at the man beneath her. He wasn't a terrorist. He wasn't an insurgent. He was a kid in a dirty hoodie, foaming at the mouth, terrified and dying. Inhale. The soldier receded. The yogi stepped forward. Ahimsa. Non-violence. Elena didn't let go, but she adjusted the pressure. She held the choke, keeping the blood flow restricted just enough to induce unconsciousness, but protecting the windpipe. Go to sleep, she thought, her eyes softening slightly. Just go to sleep. Cain's eyelids fluttered. The fight drained out of him like water from a cracked vessel. His arms flopped to the side. His head lolled back. He was out. Elena held the position for 3 more seconds, a count of 3 just to be sure. Then, she released the grip. She sat back on his chest, heaving for air. Her lungs burned. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Thump, thump, thump. The silence that followed was heavier than the violence. The Serenity Studio was a wreck. Yoga blocks were scattered like debris from an explosion. The mat beneath Cain was scuffed and twisted. The knife lay gleaming in the middle of the floor, an alien object in a sacred space. Elena looked at her hands. They were trembling, not with fear, but with the aftershocks of the adrenaline dump. She looked at her knuckles. They were white, the skin slightly grazed. She slowly climbed off Cain's unconscious body. She checked his pulse at the neck. Strong, regular. He would wake up in 10 minutes with a headache and a broken wrist, but he would wake up. She stood up, her legs feeling like rubber. She smoothed her sweater. She touched her hair. The bun had come loose, strands of silver falling across her face. She turned to the class. 15 women were staring at her. They weren't looking at her with gratitude. Not yet. They were looking at her with absolute, unadulterated shock. They were looking at a stranger. Sarah was still on the floor, clutching her throat where the drop of blood had smeared into a streak. She looked at Kane's broken body, then up at Elena. Her eyes were wide, processing the impossible physics of what she had just witnessed.
Elena.
Sarah whispered. The name sounded like a question. What was that? Mrs. Higgins was leaning against the wall, clutching her chest. You broke him, she wheezed. Like a twig. You just snapped him. Elena opened her mouth to speak, to offer some comforting platitude, to say, it's okay. It's just self-defense class. But the words died in her throat. The lie wouldn't fit anymore. The mask lay in pieces on the floor, right next to the hunting knife. You can't be a harmless old lady and a lethal weapon in the same breath. The paradox had collapsed. Is everyone okay? Elena asked finally. Her voice was raspy, stripped of its melodic teacher tone. It was the voice of Colonel Vance. I think so. The nurse stammered from the back, stepping forward. Sarah? Let me check you. The nurse rushed to Sarah, checking the cut on her neck. It was superficial. Elena backed away. She retreated to the front of the room, near the altar. She needed distance. She felt exposed, naked. The adoration in their eyes was gone, replaced by a wary awe. They had seen the wolf beneath the sheepskin. Then came the sound. Whoop whoop. Sirens. Close. Growing louder. Someone must have hit a panic button or called 911 the moment Kane burst in. Blue and red lights began to strobe against the frosted glass of the front window, mixing with the gray daylight to create a disorienting disco of emergency. Elena looked at the flashing lights. She knew what was coming. Police. Statements. Questions. Background checks. Name?
Elena Vance.
Former occupation? Classified. Training? Classified. Why is a retired special ops colonel running a yoga studio in the suburbs? Why is there a flag on your file? The quiet life was over. The sanctuary was breached. Elena looked down at Kane one last time. He groaned in his sleep. She felt a pang of pity for him, and a pang of grief for herself. He had come looking for money, but he had stolen something far more valuable. He had stolen her anonymity. She walked over to the corner, picked up a towel, and wiped the sweat from her face. She took her glasses out of her pocket and put them back on, trying to reassemble the costume. But when she looked in the mirror, the reflection didn't lie. The eyes behind the spectacles were still dilated. The jaw was still set. The posture was still ready for war. The door opened, not kicked this time but pushed with authority. Police! Hands in the air. 2 uniformed officers rushed in, guns drawn, scanning the room. They saw the women huddled in the corner. They saw the unconscious giant on the floor. And they saw the small, silver-haired woman standing over him, wiping her hands on a towel.
Mom?
The lead officer barked, confused, lowering his weapon slightly as he looked from the brute on the floor to the grandmother. Step away from the suspect. Did he attack you? Elena dropped the towel. She slowly raised her hands. He attacked us, Elena said, her voice calm, steady, and resigned. I simply de-escalated the situation. As the officer moved to cuff Kane, he glanced at the man's twisted wrist, then back at Elena. He saw the way she stood. He saw the lack of fear. His eyes narrowed. He recognized the look. He had seen it on SWAT guys and Marines. De-escalated, the officer repeated, skeptical. Right? Elena closed her eyes. She inhaled the smell of lavender, now tainted with sweat. Exhale. The intermission was over. The second act had begun. And this time, there would be no hiding in the wings. The interrogation room at the 24th District Station was a box designed to strip away humanity, layer by layer. It was painted a shade of institutional beige that somehow seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, smelling faintly of stale coffee, floor wax, and the accumulated nervous sweat of 1,000 petty criminals. To most people, this 6 by 8 foot cube was a cage. To Elena Vance, it was familiar territory. It was a tactical environment. She sat at the metal table, her hands folded politely in her lap. The handcuffs had been removed 20 minutes ago, a concession to her age and the fact that she was technically a victim, but the phantom weight of steel cuffs still ghosted around her wrists. She sat with her spine perfectly straight, not touching the back of the uncomfortable plastic chair. Her eyes were fixed on the two-way mirror to her left. She didn't try to look through it. She simply acknowledged its existence, knowing that behind the glass, eyes were watching, assessing, trying to reconcile the math that didn't add up. Inside her head, Elena was running a diagnostic. Heart rate, 68 beats per minute. Acceptable. Adrenaline. Receding, leaving behind a metallic taste in her mouth and a dull ache in her lower back. Cover story. Compromised, but salvageable. She was Elena Vance, yoga teacher. She had to inhabit that skin. She had to be the grandmother who got lucky, not the operative who executed a threat neutralization protocol. But the air in the room was thin, charged with a static electricity that warned her the storm hadn't passed. It had just moved indoors. The door buzzed and swung open. Detective James Miller walked in. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and then left out in the rain for too long. He was in his late 40s, wearing a cheap suit that strained at the shoulders and a tie that had been loosened hours ago. He carried 2 styrofoam cups of coffee and a thick file folder. He kicked the door shut with his heel and sat down opposite her. He didn't speak immediately. He slid one of the cups toward her, a peace offering or a prop. Then he opened the file, letting the paper shuffle fill the silence. He pulled out a photograph. It was a still frame from the studio's security camera. It showed a blur of motion. A woman in white midair, a man in gray being inverted. Miller tapped the photo with a thick, calloused finger. "Sugar?" he asked. Elena looked at the coffee, then up at him. She adjusted her reading glasses, the ones she didn't need. "No, thank you, detective. I take it black." "Black, right?" Miller took a sip of his own, wincing at the heat. He studied her over the rim of the cup. His eyes were gray, sharp, and utterly devoid of the deference the patrol officers had shown her. "You know, Ms. Vance, I've been a cop in Chicago for 22 years. I've seen bar fights, domestic disputes, gang hits. I've seen grandmothers hit muggers with purses. I've seen adrenaline make people do crazy things." He leaned forward, the chair creaking under his weight. "But I have never," he paused, tapping the photo again, "seen a 60-year-old woman execute a perfect ogashi hip throw on a man who outweighs her by 100 pounds, followed by a transition to a mounted Ezekiel choke in under 4 seconds. Elena offered a small, wavering smile. It was a masterpiece of acting. I don't know what those words mean, detective. I was just terrified. He was going to kill Sarah. I just reacted. We do a lot of balance work in yoga, leveraging weight." Miller didn't blink. He reached into the file and pulled out a tablet. He tapped the screen and spun it around to face her. "This is the security footage from your studio," Miller said. "It's already on the internet, by the way. Someone leaked it. Ninja Grandma is trending on Twitter. 3 million views in 2 hours." Elena watched the screen. The video was grainy, black and white, but the geometry of violence was undeniable. She watched herself. It was like watching a stranger. The figure on the screen moved with a terrifying economy. The entry, the wrist break, the throw, the choke. It wasn't frantic. It was clinical. It was efficient. It was war. "Look at the feet," Miller said softly, pointing at the screen. "Right there. That step. You didn't step back in fear. You stepped in. You closed the distance to negate his reach advantage. That's not yoga, Elena. That's CQC. Close quarters combat." Elena looked away from the screen, her hands tightening slightly on her lap. "I watched a self-defense video on YouTube once. Maybe I remembered something from it. Miller let out a short, dry laugh. He sat back, crossing his arms. YouTube, right? And I suppose you learned how to apply enough pressure to the carotid artery to induce unconsciousness without crushing the trachea from a cooking show? The air in the room grew heavier. Miller wasn't buying it. He was a hunter who had found a track that didn't belong to any animal indigenous to these woods. I don't know who you are, Miller said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. I ran your name.
Elena Vance.
Social security number issues a hit, but the file is thin. Too thin. No employment history prior to 5 years ago. No tax records. No marriage license. Just a ghost who appeared in Chicago and started teaching downward dog. Elena met his gaze. The grandmother facade was slipping, just a fraction. She let a sliver of the kernel show through, the steel beneath the silk. I am a citizen who stopped a violent felon from slitting the throat of a pregnant woman, Elena said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor she had feigned earlier. Am I under arrest, detective? No, Miller admitted, frustration tightening his jaw. You're a hero. The mayor is going to want to give you a key to the city. The press is camped out in the lobby. You're the flavor of the month. He leaned in close again, his face inches from hers. She could smell the tobacco on his breath. But I was a Marine, Ms. Vance. Fallujah, 2004. I know the difference between a civilian panic response and a soldier's muscle memory. You didn't just fight him. You neutralized him. You cleared the room visually before you even let go of his neck. I saw you check the corners on the tape. He waited, baiting her, hoping for a slip, a nod, a flash of recognition at the mention of Fallujah. Elena held her breath. Box breathing. Inhale 4. Hold 4. I'm sorry for your service, detective, she said softly. It must have been terrible. But I'm just an old woman who wants to go home and take a bath. Miller stared at her for a long, agonizing minute. He was looking for the lie, but the lie was so perfectly constructed, so seamlessly welded to the truth, that he couldn't find a crack big enough to pry open. Finally, he sighed, a sound of defeat mixed with begrudging respect. He stood up and grabbed the file. You're free to go, he said. No charges. Obviously, it's clear-cut self-defense. But Elena? She looked up as she gathered her purse. Be careful, Miller said, his hand on the doorknob. When you make a splash this big, you wake up things in the deep water. If there's anyone looking for you, they found you today. The door clicked shut behind him. Elena sat alone in the room for another 10 seconds. She let her shoulders slump. She brought her trembling hands up to her face. Miller was smart. Too smart. And he was right. The viral video. 3 million views. It wasn't just the public watching. The algorithms would pick it up. Facial recognition software, scraping the web for matches, would process the geometry of her face. Even with the graininess, even with the aging, the biometrics were there. The gait analysis, the combat signature. She stood up. Her legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead shot. She walked to the door, took a deep breath, and prepared to step out of the cage and into the circus. The lobby of the precinct was a chaotic ocean of noise and light. As soon as Elena stepped through the security doors, the flashbulbs erupted like mortar fire. A wall of reporters surged forward, held back only by 2 weary uniformed officers. Microphones on boom poles dipped and weaved like vultures' heads. Ms. Vance, over here. Did you really break his arm? Are you a martial arts master? How does it feel to be the ninja grandma? The noise was physically painful. Elena flinched, shielding her eyes with her hand. This was her nightmare. Every flash of light was a beacon, marking her location for every predator she had ever buried. Please, she whispered, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the news cycle. Back up. Give her some air. An officer shouted, shoving a cameraman back. Through the crowd, Elena saw Sarah. The young woman was sitting on a bench near the entrance, her husband's arm wrapped protectively around her. Sarah looked up and saw Elena. Her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw her teacher, They filled with a complex mix of gratitude and fear. Sarah stood up and pushed through the reporters. She threw her arms around Elena, burying her face in Elena's shoulder. "Thank you," Sarah sobbed. "Oh my God. Thank you. You saved us." Elena hugged her back, but her eyes remained open, scanning the perimeter of the lobby. She patted Sarah's back mechanically. "It's okay, Sarah. You're safe now. Go home. Take care of the baby." "But who are you?" Sarah whispered into her ear, so low that the microphones couldn't pick it up. "My husband. He watched the video," he said. "He said normal people don't move like that." Elena pulled away gently. She looked at Sarah, offering a sad, tired smile. "I'm just a yoga teacher, Sarah. Just a teacher." She turned and pushed her way toward the exit. The reporters shouted questions at her back, but she ignored them. She needed air. She needed to get to the subway. She needed to vanish. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the precinct steps. The cold Chicago wind hit her like a slap, freezing the sweat on her neck. It was evening now. The streetlights had flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows on the sidewalk. The air smelled of exhaust and snow. Elena paused on the top step, pulling her coat tighter around herself. She adjusted her scarf, trying to cover as much of her face as possible. "Walk away," she told herself. "Don't run. Walk. Find a crowd. Disappear." She descended the steps, her boots crunching on the salt-strewn concrete. The adrenaline from the interrogation was fading, replaced by a cold, creeping paranoia. She felt it before she saw it. The sensation was a prickle at the base of her skull, a biological early warning system that she hadn't felt since Kabul. It was the feeling of being in the crosshairs. She stopped. Across the street, parked under the yellow glow of a street lamp, was a car. It was a black sedan. An American make, Chevy or Ford, nondescript, boring, the kind of car you buy in bulk for government fleets. The windows were tinted darker than the legal limit in Illinois. The engine was idling, a low, steady purr that emitted a plume of white exhaust into the freezing air. It wasn't a police car. It wasn't a reporter. Reporters drove vans with logos or beat-up compacts. This was a shark in a suit. Elena stared at the car. The car sat there, silent, malevolent. Then the rear window rolled down, just an inch.
Elena froze.
Through the narrow gap, she couldn't see a face. She saw only the darkness of the interior and the faint orange glow of a cigarette tip burning in the shadows. Smoke curled out of the window, drifting lazily into the night air. It wasn't a threat. It was a greeting. "We see you." The window rolled back up with a soft electric hum. The car didn't move. It just waited. Elena's heart, which had slowed down during the interview, hammered against her ribs again. The realization washed over her like ice water. The algorithm had worked. The facial recognition had pinged a server in a subbasement in Virginia or Maryland. A flag had been raised on a file that was supposed to be dead. Miller was right. She had rung the bell. Elena turned her gaze away from the car, forcing herself to keep walking. She didn't run. She walked to the corner, turned right, and descended into the subway station. As she swiped her card, her hands were shaking so badly she dropped it. She bent down to pick it up, and for a moment the facade crumbled completely. She wasn't the Steel Lotus. She was a woman who was tired of running. But as the train rumbled into the station, screeching and sparking, Elena straightened up. She put the card in her pocket. The fear was there, yes. But beneath the fear, something else was waking up. Something cold and hard and familiar. She stepped onto the train. She found a seat in the corner, her back to the wall. She watched the doors close. The war wasn't over. It had just been on a lunch break. And now Elena Vance had to decide. Keep running or turn around and finish it. The subway ride from the 24th District to Rogers Park was a journey through the intestinal tract of the city. The fluorescent lights of the train car flickered with a stroboscopic malignancy, illuminating the exhausted faces of the late-night commuters. Elena sat in the corner seat, her body swaying rhythmically with the lurch of the carriage, but her eyes were fixed on the reflection in the dark window opposite her. She didn't see the tired, gray-haired woman wrapped in a wool coat. She saw a ghost. The digital world was already devouring her. On the phone of a teenager sitting 3 seats away, Elena heard the tinny, looped audio of her own voice. "Sarah, close your eyes." Then the sickening snap of the bone, remixed with a trap beat. The teenager laughed, swiping up to the next video. Elena pulled her scarf tighter, burying her face. The anonymity she had crafted for 5 years, the fortress of silence she had built brick by brick, had been demolished in 4 seconds of viral violence. She was no longer a person. She was content. And to the people in the black sedan parked outside the precinct, she was a loose end that had suddenly started fraying. She got off at the Morse stop. The wind off Lake Michigan was howling now, carrying snowflakes that felt like shards of glass. She walked the 3 blocks to her apartment building, her boots crunching on the frozen slush. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every parked car looked like a surveillance post. She reached her building, a brownstone that had seen better decades. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs, stepping over the squeaky board on the second landing out of habit. She reached for her keys, her hand hovering over the lock. She stopped. The door was locked. The scratch marks she had made on the brass plate years ago were aligned. But the smell was wrong. It was faint, buried under the scent of old hallway carpet and radiator heat. But it was there. Clove cigarettes and expensive leather. A scent from another life. A scent that belonged to safe houses in Beirut and briefing rooms in Langley. Elena didn't draw the pepper spray in her purse. It would be useless against the man waiting inside. She took a breath. Inhale courage, exhale fear, and unlocked the door. She pushed it open and stepped into the darkness. "Don't turn on the light, Elle." The voice came from the armchair in the corner of the living room. It was a voice like crushed velvet, smooth, luxurious, and suffocating. Elena closed the door behind her and locked it. She didn't reach for the light switch. Her eyes, already adjusted to the gloom, picked out the silhouette. He was sitting with his legs crossed, a relaxed, aristocratic posture that contrasted with the cheap IKEA furniture. "Hello, Julian," Elena said. Her voice was steady, stripping away the grandmother affectation completely. "We go by director now," the man said, the ember of his cigarette glowing bright orange as he took a drag. "But for you, Julian is fine. It's been a long time. You look domestic." Julian Thorne, the handler, the man who had signed the mission orders for Operation Red Sand, the man who had handed her the folded flag at Arlington. Elena walked to the kitchen island, placing her bag down. She felt the heavy, suffocating gravity of the past collapsing the room. "I saw your car outside the station. You couldn't just leave a note?" "We needed to see if it was really you," Julian said, smoke curling from his lips. The video was blurry. The biometrics were a 90% match, but we had to be sure. A lot of women take self-defense classes. But that hip throw, the Ezekiel choke, that's not something you learn at the YMCA. "That's my girl." "I'm not your girl, Julian. I'm retired. You signed the papers." "Retirement is a bureaucratic concept, Elena. It doesn't apply to assets of your caliber." Julian stood up. He was tall, wearing a bespoke trench coat that cost more than Elena's car. He walked toward the window, looking out at the snowy street. "You caused quite a mess today, Ninja Grandma. The press is going to dig. They're going to find the holes in your history, and when they pull the thread, the whole sweater unravels. And we can't have that." Elena gripped the edge of the granite counter. Her knuckles turned white. "So what is this? A cleanup operation? You here to put 2 behind my ear and make it look like a robbery?" Julian chuckled softly. "So dramatic. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it up the stairs." "No, I'm here to offer you a solution. A way to make this go away." "I don't want your solutions. You need them." Julian turned to face her, his face half illuminated by the streetlights outside. "Because you don't know the whole story, Elle. You think you left the life because Mark died. You think it was a tragic accident. A stray bullet. Bad luck." The mention of Mark's name sucked the air out of the room. Elena felt a cold spike of rage in her chest. Don't say his name. Mark didn't die because of bad luck. Elena, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a shout. He died because of bad math. He was asking questions about the payload on that extraction. He found out that the medical supplies we were retrieving were actually heroin bricks being moved for a warlord on our payroll.
Elena froze.
The world tilted on its axis. The silence in the apartment became a roaring sound in her ears. What? She breathed. Mark was going to blow the whistle. Julian continued, his tone clinical, detached. He was a Boy Scout. He believed in the mission. So the mission was adjusted. The ambush wasn't an ambush. It was a liquidation. The extraction team was told to hold fire for 30 seconds. Just enough time to thin the herd. Elena's mind flashed back to the Karangal. The delay. The sudden, overwhelming fire. The sniper shot that seemed too precise for a chaotic firefight. Put the sword down, Mark had said. Live. He knew. In those final moments, he knew they had been betrayed. He wanted her to survive not just the battle, but the lie. You. Elena's voice was a low growl. You knew. I authorized it, Julian said simply. It was the cost of doing business in the region. Mark was a liability. You were collateral damage that survived. We let you go because you were broken. We thought you were done. He took a step toward her. But now you're back on the radar. And you have a choice, Elena. You can come back into the fold. We have a use for a ghost like you. Or we can finish what we started in the valley. The teacup sitting on the counter, a delicate ceramic piece she had bought at a flea market, suddenly seemed very far away. The only thing that existed was the man standing in her living room, the man who had murdered her husband with a fountain pen and a signature. You authorized it, Elena repeated. It was necessary. Elena moved. It wasn't the measured, fluid motion of the yoga studio. It was pure, distilled violence. She grabbed the ceramic teacup and shattered it against the granite counter. In one motion, she lunged, holding the jagged shard of ceramic like a karambit knife. Julian was fast. He had been field-rated once, but he had spent the last decade behind a desk. He reached for the gun inside his coat. Too slow. Elena parried his arm, slamming her forearm into his radial nerve. He gasped as his hand went numb. She drove her knee into his groin, doubling him over, and then slammed him back against the wall. She pinned him there, the jagged shard of ceramic pressed against his jugular vein. A single millimeter of pressure and his life would end. Julian's eyes were wide, staring into hers. He didn't see the grandmother now. He didn't even see Colonel Vance. He saw something ancient and terrifying. Do it, Julian rasped, blood trickling from his lip where he had bitten it. Kill me, and 10 more will take my place. You can't kill the system. Elena's hand trembled. The rage was a physical heat, demanding blood. She wanted to open his throat. She wanted to watch the light fade from his eyes just like she had watched it fade from Mark's. It would be justice. It would be balance. Ahimsa. The word floated up from the depths of her consciousness. Non-violence. But this wasn't violence. This was war. And yet, killing him here now would solve nothing. He was just a middleman. A suit. If she killed him, the story died with him. She would be a fugitive, hunted for a murder that looked like a crime of passion. She needed the root. She needed the names. She needed the people who gave Julian the order. Elena exhaled, a long, shuddering breath. She pulled the shard away from his neck, but kept her forearm pinned against his throat. You're right, Julian, she whispered, her face inches from his. I can't kill the system. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a frequency that chilled his blood. But I can dismantle it, piece by piece, bone by bone. She shoved him away. He stumbled, straightening his coat, regaining his composure with a shaky dignity. Get out, Elena said. Julian looked at her, rubbing his neck. A strange look crossed his face. Fear, yes, but also a flicker of admiration. You're making a mistake, Elena. You have nowhere to go. We will burn your life down. The studio. The pregnant girl. All of it. The studio is already gone, Elena said, turning her back on him. And Elena Vance doesn't exist anymore. Julian lingered for a moment, as if wanting to say something else. But the air in the room was too toxic. He turned and unlocked the door. "Watch your back, Colonel," he said. "Watch yours," she replied without looking. The door clicked shut. Elena stood in the silence of the apartment. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. The grief that had weighed her down for 5 years, the heavy, suffocating blanket of sadness, was gone. In its place was a cold, hard purpose. Mark hadn't just died. He had been sacrificed, and she had spent 5 years breathing and stretching and drinking tea, trying to forgive a universe that hadn't been cruel, but corrupt. She walked to the bedroom. She didn't look at the bed. She walked straight to the closet and pulled out the heavy wooden trunk. She knelt before it, like a knight kneeling before an altar. She turned the key. Click. The lid creaked open. The smell of cedar and old canvas rose up to meet her. She reached in. She bypassed the folded flag. She bypassed the medals. Her hand closed around the cold steel of the Glock 19. She checked the chamber. Empty. She loaded a magazine. Click-clack. She took out the tactical belt. The knife. The passport with a different name. The stack of cash wrapped in rubber bands. She stood up and began to strip. Off went the soft linen pants. Off went the beige cardigan. Off went the reading glasses. She let them fall to the floor in a pile of white and gray, the molted skin of a creature that had outgrown its shell. She dressed in silence. Black cargo pants, a thermal long-sleeve shirt, the shoulder holster, the boots. She went to the bathroom mirror. She looked at her reflection. The silver hair was still there, but it no longer looked like the hair of a grandmother. It looked like steel wool. The wrinkles around her eyes didn't look like laugh lines anymore. They looked like scars. She pulled her hair back into a tight, severe ponytail. She walked back to the living room. She picked up her bag. She didn't look at the shattered teacup on the floor. She didn't look at the peace lilies. She took a marker from the counter and walked to the wall map of the world she had hung up, a decoration for a traveler who never traveled. She uncapped the marker and drew a red circle around a location in Virginia. Langley. Then she drew a line, a vector. She walked to the door and opened it. The hallway was empty. She didn't lock the door behind her. There was nothing left inside to protect. The sanctuary was a lie. The garden was burned. Elena Vance stepped out into the snowy Chicago night. The wind caught her coat, whipping it around her legs. She didn't feel the cold. The fire inside her was burning hot enough to melt the pavement. She wasn't a yoga teacher. She wasn't a widow. She wasn't a victim. As she walked toward the subway, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness, she finally understood the lesson Master Hideo had tried to teach her, the one she had misinterpreted for so long. The warrior isn't the one who puts the sword down. The warrior is the one who knows exactly when to pick it up. Elena reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the magazine. She smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I'm coming, Mark," she whispered to the wind. "And I'm bringing hell with me." The screen fades to black.